Hey guys, so today I wanted to show you how you can turn JSON data into objects and objects back into JSON data in Dart. This technique is called JSON serialization, and it can be used, for example, when your app is communicating with a backend, converting Dart objects into JSON for transmission between the app and the backend, and then deserializing that JSON that the server responds with into objects, Dart objects for local processing. Right, so if we look at this diagram here, I have, let's say I've got a mobile app, and then I have a backend. So at some point in the application's lifecycle, that application might have to make a post request to my backend, and then the backend's response will need to be ingested by my mobile app. So how could we do that? So my mobile app will most likely have some sort of Dart object that it will want to send to my backend. Let's say we're creating a user. My mobile app will have a user Dart object with all the data of the user that we need to create on the backend. So for the backend, in order for the backend to understand what this object means, we need to first convert it into a JSON object. And JSON is just a pattern that's language agnostic. So it can be passed around between the mobile app and the backend server. And then the JSON object will be given to our backend server for processing. And then our backend server will respond with another JSON object, which in our case will be the created user. And then this object will need to be converted into another user Dart object so that it can be then understood and processed locally by a mobile app. So this is pretty much the design of what I'll explain how to do in this video. Okay, so here I've got a example Dart project. I'm going to start by creating a user class, which will be the Dart user object that I referred to in our diagram right here, which will be sent to the backend for creating the user. So here is our user, and it's got 3 parameters. So it's got an integer as its ID, and then it's got 2 strings, name and email. So in order for me to send the data that this object will encapsulate at runtime to my backend, like we saw in our graph here, we will need to convert our user object into a JSON object. So what a JSON object means in Dart is it's just a map of string and dynamic. In order to get a JSON representation of this class, I could 100% go ahead and create it by hand by returning a new object and then adding parameters to that object that reflect what the parameters in this class are. So here it is. This is my JSON representation of the object, the user object. But as you can see, this is very error prone because all it takes is a spelling mistake, for example, in one of the keys of the object, or passing in the wrong parameter, and you've got the wrong JSON object. And let's not forget that this object has no notion of what my class is like. So as you can see, even if I pass in the name as my ID property in the object, there's no type checking. So I won't be notified of the mistake that I've just made by the static compiler. Same goes for the from_JSON method. I could return an instance of my user class and infer the parameters from a JSON parameter that I pass into my from_JSON function by doing JSON and then finding the ID parameter in the JSON object and doing the same for the other parameters here. But again, this is a manual process and it can be error prone. So there is a much better approach to doing this, and that is by using the JSON serializable library that is available for Flutter and Dart. So what we have to do is we have to add 2 Dart packages to our project, and these are JSON serializable as well as JSON annotation. Great stuff. And once these are added, I can then decorate my class with JSON serializable, and this has automatically imported the JSON annotation package into my file. And then I'm also going to create a part directive for this class. So this class will be part user.g.dart, and the static compiler will start yelling at you here because this file doesn't exist. But once we run the generator, JSON serializable will take care of creating this file. And for the record, this is a file where the from_JSON and toJSON functions will be contained. And then the last thing that I have to do, I have actually created a Visual Studio snippet for it, is to add the JSON functions to my class. So as you can see, we have a factory constructor for the from JSON function, which takes in a JSON object and then executes this _ $user from JSON function, which will be generated by the package once we run the generator. And then we have a toJSON function, which returns a map of string dynamic. And this also executes a generated function for us once we create it. So these are basically the functions that we tried to create manually before. So the last thing that we have to do is now add the build runner package, which will be able to run the generation code that creates our from JSON and toJSON function. Great, so I've added build runner now, and I can go ahead and run .run build runner build. So it's going to go ahead and generate my JSON conversion code. And there we go. So as you can see, the part directive error here has disappeared. And we've got a beautiful user.g.data file, which contains our from JSON and toJSON functions. So if we look a little bit closer, these two functions are exactly what we were trying to build before. So as you can see, the from JSON function returns a instance of our user class and infers the parameter values from the JSON by looking up the appropriate parameter in the object and casting it as the type that is required by our object. And then the toJSON function just creates a map of string dynamic using the parameters in our object that we will pass into the function. So I've actually created a quick test file called serialization test, where we can actually check what our serializer package is doing with our user JSON. So I'm going to create a user JSON object here, and then I'll go ahead and create a user Dart object using the from JSON function that was just generated for us. So I do user from JSON, and then I pass in my user JSON object that I've got, JSON object that I've got up here. And then I'm going to assert that all the parameters in my newly created user actually match up with the JSON parameters. Here we go. So let's run the test. I'm actually going to put a breakpoint here so we can see what the object looks like. Cool, so let's inspect the user object that was created for us, and you can see that the ID is 1, just as it is in the JSON. Our email is test@email.com, and the name is Karim. So it represents exactly our JSON right here. And because of that, the test should pass. There we go. Now I'm going to do the same to test the toJSON function. So I need a user where the ID is 1, the name is Karim, and the email is test@email.com. And then I'm going to create my JSON. Result is user.toJSON. And then I'm going to check that all the parameters in the result JSON object actually match up with our expected JSON right here. And I'll do the same. I'll put a breakpoint right here so we can see the result object as it gets serialized. So here we go. So we've got our result object, which has 3 items which is a map, and it's got 3 items: ID equals to 1, name equals Karim, and email equals test@email.com. So because of that, our test will pass again. And here we go. This is how you can serialize JSON into Dart objects and Dart objects back into JSON in a very simple and type-safe way. If you found this video valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit that notification bell down below so that you can get updates on when new Flutter videos come out on my channel. Happy coding, and I'll see you next time.